Y'all made it this far. Congratulations. We're almost done. I just kind of want to point out, just as a procedural thing, that my name is spelled wrong on the program.
Sorry.
There's no S at the end. I just need to point that out. But I'll move right along. Howie and I titled this presentation, Limits of Popular Sovereignty, Political Participation in the 21st Century, because we wanted to take a look at the intersections between population, ethics, and policy, which is essentially what I investigated in my paper, and the role of privacy in the context of the surveillance state. So essentially we want to talk about, during this panel session, democratic governance, its connections to freedom, privacy, and other important ethical considerations. So jumping right in. I got interested in population stuff, I guess, just contemplating more philosophical things at the beginning of my freshman year, and pretty much since then. And so that's kind of what I wanted to culminate, my studies in public policy, is talking about kind of things that I've been thinking about over the course of my college. So when someone brings up the idea of population policy, to begin with, people usually jump to one of two conclusions, and they think that person is talking about something draconian, like China's one-child policy, or the opposite extreme, which is common in basically all countries, and that's this notion that, well, it's within somebody's reproductive rights to have as many children as he or she desires. And my thesis seeks to challenge these notions and to put forth a series of contentions stemming from what I perceive to be a couple foundational objective truths. So let's cast aside our preconceived notions about procreation for now, and if you will, allow me to take you on a journey way back to the beginning of time itself. And so we're at the beginning of time, and we're at the center of the universe, witnessing the Big Bang. And let's fast forward several billion years. Now the planet Earth is being formed. There are these catastrophic, calamitous changes that are taking place on the Earth's surface. And we'll fast forward another few billion years, to about 4 billion years ago. And something truly unique happens in this moment that, to our collective knowledge, has never been observed anywhere else in the universe, and that is life. Through this process called abiogenesis, something incredibly improbable, and I hate to use the word improbable here because you can't assign a probability to an event that's only been witnessed once. An improbable series of events basically pushed a DNA molecule and made it into a cell and made it possible to self-replicate. So let's jump ahead to the present day, April 26th, 2013, and since that point in time, roughly 4 billion years ago, there's been, as you know, this huge proliferation of DNA-based organisms. Every creature with DNA is a direct descendant of one instance of a DNA molecule replicating 4 billion years ago. And what's changed? Well, I'll get to that, but first, let's think about what's the same. And just like that first organism, we have to consume in order to survive. And for all creatures except humans, there's this subconscious motivation to propel the DNA into the future, and that's reproduction. And in 4 billion years, these issues are just as relevant as they were back then, and they haven't really changed. And so I would put forth this proposition that these two things, consumption and reproduction, are intrinsic properties of life. Now, what has changed is the development of sentience and of higher intelligence. In order for the DNA molecule, or a collection of DNA molecules, to better navigate the environment, it needs to avoid doing things that would be disadvantageous to its goal in life, which is to reproduce. And to this end, organisms evolve the ability not only to experience sensation, but also to react to the sensations. And I contend in my thesis that the motivating factor for most all organisms is to avoid being in a negative state. In other words, the organism is somewhere along a continuum where at one end you're in an extreme state of deprivation or discomfort, and at the other end you have a state in which that organism isn't in any way being deprived or wanting or needing. And for all those organisms that don't directly absorb sunlight and convert it into energy, they need to get that energy from somewhere. And if it's not eating plants, then it's eating something that eats plants. And that act is what I would term cannibalism, because it's essentially stealing a biological relative's energy for consumption purposes. So if that organism also possesses the capacity to be in this negative state we've been talking about, then you're essentially breaking something of equal value to sustain yourself. Because this organism being eaten has the capacity to be harmed to a similar extent as the organism eating it. You're just breaking down statues to make statues, and you're generating lots of waste in the process. So this cannibalistic competition, which is essentially a gladiator war because you're having equal valued life forms go at it to the death with each other for billions of years, and I'd argue that this whole process generated a whole lot more bad feelings, more ouches, than it did satisfaction. Because now we discover that there's really no winning, that everything dies at the end. Our satisfaction comes at the expense of others. So evolution is really just a rising pile of bodies on which the next generation fights, stands, and dies. Well, humans again changed the game, however. And in addition to being able to conceptualize all of these issues that I brought about right now, we're also capable of this thing called higher intelligence. We're all the only species that makes choices about reproduction. Another implication of our intelligence is that we're also now cognizant that we need, want, and desire things. And another implication of our intelligence is, that's basically it, and we have these basic needs that we feel compelled to satisfy, so food, air, water, and when we don't have these certain things that we need, we do pay a psychological price in the sense that these needs really do overpower a rational thought. I contend that this higher intelligence reacts to these experiences interpreted as ouch that I talked about earlier, and this thinking brain plots ways to minimize them and to maximize pleasant experiences. That is essentially the thinking brain. So that's what keeps us and many other organisms in the game, is this addiction, this being compelled to satisfy negative states so as to temporarily be in a state where you're better off. So now we're at this point where, okay, we recognize that we're caught up in this DNA replication process, but we have this higher intelligence. So where do we go from here? What's our purpose? Well, you hear all these hackneyed phrases being thrown around as justification for our existence. For example, don't worry, it's all part of God's plan. He said to be fruitful and multiply. Well, in truth, I don't really know how to respond to that, other than saying there's no evidence of that, so why should I believe it? Others might respond that, well, there's going to be this technological singularity in the future in which we'll all be embracing pleasure, transhumanism. We'll get to the stage where there won't be such a thing as pain and pleasure, or as pain, it'll be all pleasure in our blissful technological future. Well, I, for one, don't think this is going to be happening anytime soon. And not only that, at what price is this going to be paid? Is this future going to outweigh the price that's been paid and will continue to be paid in terms of suffering between now and this nebulous future? I think it's doubtful. So now we're standing face to face with the reality that there is no great purpose to life. So if that's the case, is it a good idea or a responsible thing to do to procreate? And according to what's been laid out so far, it's probably not a good idea. Because being alive means you have to consume things of equal value to yourself in order to survive. It means you have to constantly satisfy deprivation, and that there's no such thing as winning. He who dies with the most stuff does not, contrary to popular belief, win. Now, weighing in on from a different issue, that's kind of my third bullet point here. South African philosopher David Benatar has also thought about the issue of whether or not it's a good idea to bring people into existence. And he argues that bringing people into existence is always a harm. And he puts forth what's called the basic asymmetry, which I think is here. It has four main contentions. Basically, the first two are non-controversial, that the presence of pain is bad, and that the presence of pleasure is good. Now, that's the symmetrical part. Now, when we compare this to non-existence, a non-existent person, we can say that the absence of pain is good, even if that good is not enjoyed by anyone, and that the absence of pleasure is not bad unless there exists someone for whom this absence is deprivation. So it's always a problem to come into existence because there's the chance that while you'll experience pleasure, there's the possibility of pain, and that negative, that possibility is enough to make a state of non-existence preferable. And there's also this imposition argument that he puts forth by saying that it's unethically unjustified to impose the potential for harm on future independent consciousnesses that you would generate. So there's considerable back and forth, and I don't mean to say that this is really like, I don't know, this is what I would consider the truth. But there's considerable back and forth in circles with regards to this argument. But let's pretend for a moment that it is an objective truth, that coming into existence is something that should be avoided. So what should the government do in order to ensure that this harmful behavior isn't taking place? What sorts of policies would or might be justified or be on the table if the U.S. government, for instance, committed to reducing suffering by preventing the creation of conscious beings? And that's basically where we're at today. That's something I want to answer in the context of the national security apparatus, which is creating new justifications for bypassing public participation and debate.
So with that in mind, I would like to start off with a story where I was in box 1, which is bad. And I was sitting on a tree in the hot Texas sun with an exhaust pipe pointed right at my face. And the reason I didn't move is because I was handcuffed to that tree. And I thought to myself at the time, why on earth am I paying taxes for someone else to handcuff me to a tree? and from that moment, I began a serious academic interrogation of the war on drugs, the war on terror, and exactly to what purposes and ends law enforcement puts the great resources and technology that our society provides for them. So, with that in mind, in 2012, there was a law passed that required the FAA to integrate drones into the domestic airspace by 2015. For anyone who's following, there's been about 700 drones integrated into the airspace up until now, and they're expecting that by 2015 and 2020, you're going to have something like 30,000. Now, this is great because your Domino's delivery is going to come in an awesome drone, but it might not be quite as great when you think about the pre-existing national security policy networks in which drones were being implemented. And so, the first thing that kind of ultimate background, although I'm not going to go back to the Big Bang, we still are going to need to look at a theoretical understanding of privacy. Because without any sort of understanding of privacy, you have no way to interrogate the types of technologies that may or may not invade it, and to what purpose. We can't get at the purposes of national security or the types of technology that are used for the benefit of government prerogatives without understanding our fundamental relationship to government. So, in modern times, we think about privacy often in the context of the Fourth Amendment. I love my senator from Kentucky, Mr. Rand Paul, who is a vehement defender of the Fourth Amendment. But, unfortunately, the Fourth Amendment is, like most things in the Constitution, a little outdated. It says that you cannot be unreasonably searched on your person or in a physical area. Well, new technology allows us to be searched in many ways that are not being handcuffed to a tree and having your pockets empty. There's a lot of new ways in which privacy can be invaded, and we're relating to the state in all sorts of mediated ways. And so what I want to look at is this understanding of privacy that is not individual. It's a social right to privacy that not only allows for what we normally think of, which is disengagement from society. This man in his castle sort of idea is the idea of disengagement. I want to think about privacy as the right to engage. And if you understand privacy as the right to engage, it means that you can exercise any sort of association or other guaranteed freedoms without being surveilled or watched. And so it kind of overturns this concept of privacy as an individual right. I love this quote: "Constituting legal protection of privacy through an individual right tethers privacy protections to an uncertain anchor." And the reason that it does so is because technology and social expectations of privacy are always changing, and the law does often not change with it. So, with that idea of privacy in mind, I want to flip to kind of the second part of my thesis, which is how people are always fighting the last war. And that is this bottom part here, that the past structures current policy options. When most people think about drones, we think about the Predator drone. That's the one that we use to fight terrorists abroad. It's the same one that the Department of Homeland Security uses to patrol our borders. And it's the same one that the Department of Homeland Security lent to a SWAT team in North Dakota to surveil a citizen on his own ranch, which eventually led to his arrest. And that happened in 2011. And so when most people think about drone integration into the United States, what you think about is the war on terror. You think about how this technology, which has been used so efficiently on the battlefield, might be turned towards domestic surveillance. But what that would fail to look at is how the war on drugs fundamentally changed each American's right or relationship to the government in the 1980s. And by tethering the right to privacy on an individual anchor, what happened in the war on drugs is that most of us lost the spirit of the Fourth Amendment protections under the law. And one way in which this directly impacts domestic drone integration is that there is no Fourth Amendment restriction against aerial surveillance, as long as that aerial surveillance is conducted in the navigable airspace. So that means that a helicopter, this is a case from 1989, a helicopter who is being operated by the government gets an anonymous tip from someone who says that this guy is growing marijuana in his backyard. And so the police take out a helicopter, they fly to 400 feet right over the house, they look right down, they see what they think might be a marijuana plant, and they eventually get a warrant, and it leads to his arrest. And so we can see here how relying on the Fourth Amendment and relying on an abstract notion of what individual privacy means to me or to you might not be enough to confront the changing imperatives of national security. And so now that we've questioned our existence and what it means to function as a citizen in a society, we'd like to bring you all together into some mock scenarios. And at this point, we will encourage anyone to contribute, and like to open it up real quickly to any questions about the topics that we've gone over so far, so we're all on the same page when we go into these scenarios. Okay, no? Oh. All right, so first one is it's 2012, and Stephen has made a splash in the national political scene, and he has convinced the majority of Americans in the objective truth that we discussed earlier. And as part of that, the American people decide to vote on a population control measure. But at the same time, people say, I don't want Big Brother looking in my backyard. I don't want him looking at what I'm doing while I'm barbecuing, which is Senator Paul's favorite analogy. And they vote nay to unwarranted drone surveillance. And so what we want to look at is how these two votes might be compatible in 21st century popular sovereignty.
Yeah, so we have this
arrangement here where there are these two policies that have passed, and so I guess we can look at what's going to happen as a result of that. And so one thing we talked about is, well, how we talked about is, I guess, the incursion of, the security apparatus into the context of the home. So if you can, there may be a possibility now to, even though warrantless drones are not okay in the United States context, maybe there's a probable cause to suggest that someone's having more kids than they should, right? And so now, can you get a warrant to conduct a drone surveillance over a person's house who has a probable cause of being or having like too many kids? It seems like within this particular framework, yes, because while unwarranted surveillance is not something that the public voted yes on, warranted is, and so what I guess kind of we can discuss the implications of that as well. And that kind of brings, is speaking with it, I guess, paternalistically, it is to some degree telling you what you can do in your own home, I guess, with regard to reproductive rights. And so, you want to talk about the third part about disengagement?
Yeah, and so really what this brings up is the idea that body politic can hold completely conflicting norms in their head at the same time. So you can vote on a measure that that allows society to define an action that you take in your own home, much in the same way that we have decided that it's completely okay to regulate and arrest people who grow marijuana in their homes. We've also agreed that it's okay for the government to surveil someone who has been sending email messages to people from the wrong country. So this is kind of a way to demonstrate how that logic could be taken in an abstract context. And what you see here is that even if you vote no on a measure concerning surveillance technology, that can remain incompatible with a measure promoting a type of social control.